We are often tempted to think that life is a patchwork quilt of accidents, an endless series of unconnected happenings, some joyful, some tragic, many trivial, and all lacking any central thread. A missed train, an unexpected encounter, a sudden illness. These things appear to us as though thrown by chance into the pathway of our lives. Yet I must confess that I have never been able to believe in sheer accident. The very word chance seems to me like a shadow without substance, a word we employ when our eyes are too dim to trace the true design. For if there is indeed a God who holds the stars in place and gives breath to every living thing, then it seems impossible to imagine that he has left the details of our lives wholly to the roll of some cosmic dice. What appears as accident may be the whisper of providence. I have sometimes reflected that providence is like the backside of a tapestry. We who live in time are forever gazing at the tangled knots, the loose threads, and the strange crossings that seem to make no pattern at all. One thread ends abruptly, another changes color without warning, and we are left bewildered, unable to make sense of what is before us. But on the other side, known perfectly to the divine weaver, there is a design so intricate, so harmonious, that if we glimpsed it but once, even for a moment, we should fall to our knees in adoration. Consider how often in life the apparently trivial proves decisive. A book dropped by mistake into one's hands awakens a new vision of truth. A friendship formed in what seemed a casual meeting alters the whole course of one's journey. A delay, which at the time felt irksome, prevents one from being present in some later danger. We label these things coincidence. But if God be God, can coincidence be anything but his anonymity? Yet the difficulty is not in believing that God can weave the grand pattern, but rather in reconciling providence with suffering. For what of the accident that ends in death? What of the illness that brings long agony? It would be dishonest to pretend that we can see through these dark glass panes, and yet Christian faith bids us to believe that even the dark patches belong to the whole picture. Providence does not mean that everything will feel sweet in the moment, but that nothing is wasted, nothing is left outside the sovereignty of divine love. One may think of a master composer who, in the midst of a majestic symphony, includes a dissonant note. To the untrained ear, it jars, it sounds like a mistake. But heard in the fullness of the composition, that very discord gives poignancy and depth to the resolution that follows. So it may be with the harsh notes of our own lives. We cry out against them, not realizing that without them, the music of eternity would lose its beauty. Providence is most clearly seen not in the avoidance of suffering, but in the transformation of it. For the Christian knows that the central accident of history, the crucifixion of Christ, was no accident at all, but the most deliberate act of providence. What looked like the triumph of chaos was in fact the axis upon which all history turned. If God could take that apparent calamity and make it the fountainhead of redemption, dare we doubt that he can make something even of our small accidents? The heart of the matter lies in trust. To believe in providence is not to be given a map of all the turns ahead. Rather, it is to trust the guide who knows the way, even when the road seems to vanish into the fog. Faith does not demand that we understand every twist, but that we cling to the hand that leads us through it. When next you are interrupted, delayed, or disappointed, perhaps you might ask yourself, is this accident merely a shadow of something larger? For what we call interruption may be, in fact, a divine appointment, and what we dismiss as failure may be the opening of a greater door. God's providence, then, is not merely about grand destiny, it is present in the humblest detail. He is no absentee landlord, leaving the world to the mechanics of chance. He is rather like a poet shaping every syllable, like a painter mindful of every brushstroke. To walk in faith is to begin to notice these brushstrokes, to see in them not accidents, but the very handwriting of heaven upon the pages of our days. Providence is never a crude machinery grinding forward without care for the individual. On the contrary, It is the most delicate of instruments, like the invisible wind that bends the course of a single leaf as it falls from the tree, guiding it gently to its resting place. We do not suppose that the leaf chose its descent, nor do we imagine that its pattern was meaningless. There is purpose even in such quiet things, and infinitely more in the lives of those for whom Christ shed his blood. Yet many shrink from this thought, for they fear it turns men into puppets. But providence does not annul our choices, it works mysteriously with them. The marvel is not that God controls like a tyrant, but that he weaves free will itself into the tapestry. We are like children allowed to scatter blocks upon the floor, yet the Father, patient and wise, arranges even our clumsiest structures into something that hints at order. Our freedom is real and our responsibility weighty, but his hand is still stronger and his wisdom deeper. Think of Joseph, betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery. To him, the chain of events must have seemed nothing but a tragic cascade of accidents. Envy, betrayal, false accusation, prison. Yet years later, he could say with serenity, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." Here, in that ancient story, we see most vividly how the crooked lines of human sin can still be bent by providence into a sentence of salvation. The famine that threatened a nation became the stage for God's provision. What was sown in malice bore fruit in mercy. And what of our own small stories? I dare say many of us will one day, perhaps in eternity, look back on our lives and see that the moments which seemed most barren were in fact pregnant with unseen grace. The night when we wept alone, believing heaven to be silent, may prove to have been the very hour when God was closest, preparing the dawn. The journey we thought wasted may turn out to have been the necessary road to our true home. There is, I believe, a kind of holy irony in providence, for God so often writes his best chapters out of what we call mistakes. Peter's denial, surely an accident of cowardice, became the furnace in which his humility was forged. Paul's imprisonment, which seemed to silence him, gave birth to letters that still speak to millions. The accidents of history are the ink with which God writes redemption. Therefore, to trust providence is not to expect a life free of detours, but to believe that the detours themselves are part of the way. It is to live with a certain watchfulness, a readiness to see in the ordinary a hint of the extraordinary. The Christian who has learned this secret begins to treat interruptions not as enemies but as potential friends, bearing messages from above. The real challenge, of course, lies in the waiting, for providence often hides its meaning until the story is nearly done. We long for immediate explanations, but God rarely gives them. He is more like an artist who does not unveil his canvas until the strokes are complete. We are asked to live in suspense and to cultivate the patience of faith. It is a hard discipline, but it trains the soul for heaven, where at last the full design will be revealed. So let us not despise the apparent accidents. They are the threads which, in God's loom, may shine brightest in the finished fabric. Our task is not to decipher each thread now, but to trust the weaver. There is, I think, a profound consolation in realizing that providence has always been the stage upon which the saints have walked. None of their lives were orderly from the world's perspective. Abraham wandered, never seeing the full promise in his lifetime. Moses stumbled in speech and temper, yet was chosen to lead. Ruth gleaned in a foreign field, her story appearing small and incidental, yet she became an ancestor of Christ. Each life judged in fragments looked like happenstance, yet when stitched together by the eternal hand, these fragments formed the very fabric of salvation history. And what of our own generation? We are tempted to imagine that we live in an age of accidents, where history lurches forward blindly, driven by chance or by the whims of men. Wars break out, economies collapse, families fracture, and we say, these are merely the tumblings of fortune. But the Christian confession is otherwise. Even now, amid apparent chaos, a wisdom deeper than ours is at work. The pages of tomorrow are not blank. They are already held in the mind of the author. We must not confuse providence with fate. Fate is a cold word, impersonal and inexorable, crushing individuality beneath its weight. Providence, by contrast, is personal, tender, and wise. It takes into account not only the grand arcs of history, but the secret prayers of a child, the unnoticed kindness of a passerby, the hidden sacrifice of a mother. Nothing is too small for the one who counts the hairs on our heads. Providence is not the iron hand of inevitability, but the loving hand of a father who shapes all things toward good. Here we touch the edge of a great paradox. God's providence is both hidden and revealed. Hidden because we cannot predict it, nor can we trace its paths in advance. Revealed because in hindsight we often see its fingerprints, subtle yet unmistakable. The very events we once resented may become the milestones of grace. That which we thought an end may prove to have been the beginning of something far more splendid. It is a curious thing, but I have found that providence often seems clearest not in triumph, but in weakness. When we are strong, we attribute success to ourselves. When we are weak, we notice the mysterious provisions that come unbidden. A word of encouragement arrives at the precise hour we most need it. A door, long shut, opens unexpectedly. A burden too heavy to bear is lifted in the very moment of collapse. These are the whispers of providence, reminding us that we are never alone and that the story is never ours to write unaided. If we could but see eternity, all these accidents would fall into place like pieces of a mosaic. What now looks like a random scattering of colored shards would appear as the precise arrangement of a master's art. Each joy, each sorrow, each apparent détournement of it wasted, all of it essential to the picture he is creating. Therefore, my friends, the true wisdom is not to demand explanations, but to cultivate trust. We are not promised sight, but we are promised presence. The hand of providence may not always remove the thorn, but it will always sustain the soul. Providence, if we dare to trust it, changes not only the way we look at our past, but the way we live in our present. For if accidents are not accidents, if interruptions may be invitations, if disappointments may be disguised mercies, then every moment of life becomes charged with sacred possibility. The Christian is invited to live awake, to treat each encounter as though it might be woven into eternity. A stranger's face on the street, a sudden delay at the crossing, an unexpected letter, all these may carry within them a significance far greater than we suppose. This does not mean we must grow anxious, as though each choice were a puzzle whose solution we must perfectly discover. Rather, it means that we may rest. For if God is indeed guiding, then even our mistakes are not beyond his redemptive hand. We are not like tightrope walkers, forever trembling lest one misstep plunge us into ruin. We are like children holding a father's hand. Though we stumble, he will not let us fall. Providence also invites courage. For if God governs even the smallest turn of our lives, then nothing can ultimately be against us. The world may strike us with blows, and fortune may seem to mock us, but behind all this stands the assurance that no suffering is unredeemable. The early Christians could face lions and flames because they believed that history, however cruel its surface, was already mastered by one who writes only truth and goodness in the end. And how does this shape our hope? It teaches us to wait with patience for the day when all shadows will flee. Providence is, in this life, a half-revealed mystery, but in the life to come, it will be the music to which we dance. We shall see then that what we called accidents were like brushstrokes in the margin of a great painting, strange in isolation, but beautiful in the whole. The threads of loss and the colors of joy will together form a pattern more glorious than the human imagination could conceive. Perhaps this is what Paul meant when he declared that all things work together for good to those who love God. Notice he did not say all things are good, nor that all things feel good, but that all things dark and light, bitter and sweet, work together toward good. This is the very essence of providence. the alchemy by which God makes gold out of dust, music out of silence, life out of death. To trust Providence, then, is to begin even now to live as citizens of another country, where nothing is wasted and nothing is left to chance. We walk through a world that looks broken and scattered, yet faith whispers that every shard will one day be set in its rightful place. And so let us carry ourselves with reverence toward each moment, for each may be a thread of eternity. Let us endure with patience, for what is obscure now will shine later. Let us give thanks, for even the smallest mercies are letters from the divine author. Above all, let us hope, for if Providence rules, then the story, however tangled today, is certain to end in joy. The mystery of Providence at its deepest is bound up with love. For if God were merely powerful, His governance of our accidents might terrify us. We might feel like pawns moved about a chessboard, but He is not only sovereign, He is Father. His rule is personal, and His power is always married to compassion. To believe in Providence is, therefore, not simply to accept that God directs the course of history, but to trust that He directs it with the tenderness of one who knows our frame, who remembers we are dust, and who bends even the hardest stones into pathways of grace. Yet we must not imagine that Providence always feels gentle in its touch. The chisel of the sculptor is sharp, and the strokes that carve beauty may also cause pain. Still, the stone does not see the image that is emerging. Only the sculptor sees. We, too, do not yet see what we are becoming under the patient hand of God. It is only in the great unveiling that we shall know why this accident, that loss, or this sorrow were necessary strokes. And then we shall not complain, but rather marvel at the wisdom that shaped us. The world scoffs at this, calling it wishful thinking, the invention of comfort for weak souls. But I suggest it is the opposite. To believe that all is mere accident is to embrace despair, to live in a universe without meaning. To believe in Providence is to take the harder road, to hold that every life matters, that every moment has weight, and that no suffering is trivial. This belief does not anesthetize the soul, it awakens it. It calls us to vigilance, gratitude, and courage. It is a strange thing, but when one truly embraces Providence, the smallest details of life grow luminous. A shaft of sunlight through the window, the laughter of a child, a word spoken at just the right time, these become sacraments of God's hidden care. Nothing is too little to be overlooked, for the God who rules galaxies is the same who clothes the lilies. The accidents of the day are no longer dismissed. They are received with reverence, like sealed letters from heaven. And when at last we come to the end of our journey, when our days seem gathered up like a scroll, I think we shall look back and smile. We shall see that the twists which puzzled us, the storms which frightened us, the delays which annoyed us, were, in fact, the very instruments of our salvation. We shall bless the accidents most of all, for in them Providence was most hidden, and therefore most wonderful. So let us live now with quiet confidence. The hand that guides the sparrow's flight is the same hand that guides your steps. The world is not chaos, but cosmos, not a battlefield of chance, but a garden tended by eternal love. And if we trust that love, we shall find that every accident, rightly understood, is a miracle. There is, I think, a kind of secret training that Providence imparts to the soul. It teaches us to live in the tension between what is hidden and what is promised. For we cannot yet see the full tapestry, but we are assured that the weaver has not dropped the threads. This posture of trust disciplines our restless hearts. It draws us away from the illusion that control is ours to wield, and teaches us instead the holy art of surrender. Surrender is not passivity. It is not the abdication of choice or the denial of responsibility. Rather, it is the joyful recognition that even when our choices fail, they do not overthrow God's purpose. We labor, yes, but we labor in hope, knowing that Providence gathers both our victories and our failures into a greater whole. The kingdom of God is not fragile. It does not depend upon our flawless performance. Indeed, providence has a way of bending even sin itself toward redemption, not by excusing it nor by denying its ugliness, but by overruling it. Consider the cross once more. Humanity's darkest crime became the very fountain of salvation. So too, in smaller ways, our failures can be taken up into the mercy of God. What we intended for ruin, He can use for healing. The prodigal's wasted years are not erased, but transformed into the soil of repentance and joy. This is why the Christian may walk with a peculiar mixture of gravity and cheerfulness. Gravity, because we know that our days are not trivial, that each accident may be heavy with eternal consequence. Cheerfulness, because we know that we cannot, in the end, derail the goodness of God's design. To believe in providence is to believe that the story is safe in His hands, even when the chapter we are reading feels dark. And perhaps this is the greatest comfort, that nothing is wasted. Not a tear, not a prayer, not even a sigh escapes His notice. The apparent accidents are gathered up like jewels in the treasury of heaven. What we call interruptions, He calls appointments. What we call mistakes, He calls materials. What we call chance, He calls providence. There will come a day when we shall see clearly. On that day, I imagine, we will not so much ask God for explanations as we will fall silent in wonder, for we shall see that the labyrinth of our days was in fact a path straight toward His heart. Every detour will appear as a design, every shadow as a preparation for the light, and we shall know that we were never lost, never forgotten, never abandoned, not for a single moment. Until then, let us walk with trust. Let us meet the accidents of life with patience, gratitude, and hope. For hidden beneath their surface is the eternal smile of a Father whose providence is not accident at all, but love in disguise. If we are honest, much of our perplexity about providence arises because we try to measure eternity with the short ruler of time. We look at one event, one sorrow, one disappointment, one accident, and demand that it justify itself at once. Yet eternity is not so hurried. The story God is telling is vast, sweeping from before the foundation of the world to the dawn of the new creation. Our lives are but paragraphs in that great book. To insist that we must understand each sentence now is as if a child, handed a page from Shakespeare, declared the whole play meaningless because he cannot grasp the scene. Providence requires of us the virtue of patience, not passive waiting, but a waiting that leans forward in expectation. It is the patience of a traveler in a foreign land who knows that he is not yet home, yet trusts the road will lead him there. We live in the middle chapters where suspense abounds, but suspense is not the absence of plot. It is the proof that a plot exists. There is also comfort in remembering that providence is not only cosmic but intimate. The God who governs galaxies is also the God who guides footsteps. He orders the rise and fall of nations, yet also counts the tears on your cheek. The scale of His care does not diminish its detail. Indeed, the greatness of His power is shown precisely in this, that He is able to rule all without neglecting any. This truth, if taken seriously, changes the posture of daily life, for it means that nothing is beneath God's attention, and therefore nothing in our lives is meaningless. The meeting delayed, the friend unexpectedly gained, the illness that forces us to slow all. These may be threads of grace, though their color appears dark to us now. To believe this is to live alert, to treat the ordinary as sacramental. Yet providence also reminds us of responsibility, for though God overrules accidents, He does not excuse negligence. We are not invited to fatalism as though our choices were irrelevant. On the contrary, providence gives weight to our decisions, for they are woven into the eternal fabric. The letter we choose to write, the kindness we extend, the truth we speak, these are not small things. They are instruments by which God carries forward His secret design. One day, perhaps, we shall see how the smallest act of obedience set in motion a chain of blessings we never imagined. Perhaps a word spoken to a stranger will echo down generations. Perhaps a sacrifice hidden from all eyes, but God's will shine brightest in eternity. Such is the strange arithmetic of providence. Nothing offered in love is ever lost. So let us not despise the present moment. For the present, however humble, is the theater of providence. Yesterday is memory, tomorrow is mystery. But today, this hour, this choice, this accident is charged with eternal significance. One of the deepest consolations of providence is that it redeems our sense of exile. For who among us has not felt at some time that life is bewildering, that we are strangers in a land not our own? Our hearts ache for permanence, for home, for an order we rarely glimpse in the hurly-burly of days. The doctrine of providence tells us that this ache is not madness but memory, the memory of a homeland we have not yet seen with our eyes, but which our souls recognize by instinct. Every so-called accident may, in fact, be a milestone on the hidden road that leads us back to that country. Indeed, accidents are often the signposts of eternity. We plan for one path and suddenly find ourselves thrust upon another. At the time, it feels like loss. In retrospect, it often proves to be direction. The detour, which seemed a denial, may prove to have been the truest way. Providence uses the crooked stick to draw the straight line. But here lies a mystery both terrible and beautiful. Providence does not spare us from wounds. Sometimes it leads us through valleys so dark that the very idea of design seems absurd. Yet those valleys may be the very places where our souls are most enlarged. A clay vessel, if it is to be useful, must first be pressed and broken on the wheel of the potter. So too, we are shaped by accidents that feel like shattering, and yet the potter's hand is steady, his purpose kind. The cracks in our vessels may become the channels through which his light shines most brightly. This, perhaps, is why so many who have suffered greatly become paradoxically the bearers of greatest consolation to others. Their accidents did not destroy them. They transformed them. They learned through pain that providence is not the absence of suffering, but the presence of God within it. And when such souls speak, we feel that they carry an authority deeper than words, a witness to the hidden strength of divine care. If this is true, then our task is not to demand explanations, but to cultivate attentiveness, to live as though each accident might be the brushstroke of an artist who never wastes paint, to ask, when faced with interruption, what is being offered to me here? What invitation hides beneath this seeming misfortune? Such questions do not always yield immediate answers, but they shape the soul into readiness. And readiness is the posture of faith. The end of providence, I think, is not merely that our lives should make sense to us, but that they should be caught up into the eternal symphony of God's glory. Our accidents, redeemed and woven together, will one day resound as music too grand for mortal ears, and then we shall know that not a moment was wasted, not a step was lost. All was gift, even when we mistook it for curse. In reflecting upon providence, we have wandered through the valley of accidents, peered into the fog of uncertainty, and traced faint outlines of the great tapestry whose pattern is known only to God. We have seen that what appears random is not beyond his sight, and that what feels meaningless may, in truth, be a thread of eternal weight. Yet it is fitting that I should end not with answers, but with the acknowledgement of mystery. For providence, like God himself, cannot be contained within the small vessel of human reason. We are permitted glimpses, hints, and reassurances, but never the whole until the day when all shadows flee. The accidents of life will continue to confront us. Trains will be missed, friendships will form and fracture, illness will descend, and death will claim those we love. To call these things providence does not erase their pain. Christianity does not traffic in denial, but it does proclaim that no pain is wasted, no sorrow forgotten, and no moment abandoned. The cross, which seemed the most senseless of all accidents, was the triumph of divine purpose. If that is true, then we may dare to believe that our own sorrows, however sharp, are folded into the same eternal plan. There is, I think, a peculiar peace that comes when one yields to Providence. It is not the peace of understanding everything, but the peace of trusting someone. We walk not by sight, but by faith in a God whose character is goodness itself. To entrust ourselves to His providence is to rest in the assurance that we are not adrift on a sea of chance, but carried in the arms of love. This trust transforms how we live. It teaches us to receive interruptions with patience, disappointments with courage, and joys with gratitude. It teaches us to look upon each moment with reverence, as though eternity itself might be whispering within it. And when at last our days are gathered up, I believe we shall look back and see that every apparent accident was in truth a step on the road home. The detours were directions, the delays were protections, the losses were preparations, and the sorrows were refinements. We shall bless the hand that guided us, even when it led us through the dark, and we shall marvel that He was with us always when we knew it and when we did not. Therefore, dear friends, let us live now with courage, with patience, and with joy, for the story is not ours to control, but it is safe in the hands of One who is both author and Father. The accidents are not accidents, they are invitations to trust, to hope, and to love. One day all will be made plain, and we shall see that the whole was grace. If this meditation has stirred you, I would invite you to reflect further. And if you have found meaning here, I humbly ask you to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel so that others too may join us in pondering the eternal mysteries of God's wisdom and love.